Hi, my name is Sarah Morand. My pen name is SG Morand, and I have embarked on a journey to read through all 51 volumes of the Harvard Classics collection. And I'm currently on volume 3. In my last video, I talked about Milton's speech on the freedom of the press, Areopagitica. And in this video, I will be talking about Milton's Tractate on Education, which is a topic that I'm very excited to talk about. And so far, I've very much enjoyed Milton. I've enjoyed all of Volume 3, really, which included Francis Bacon, Milton, and will include, after Milton, Thomas Browne. And it's been a nice little change of pace from Volume 2, which was philosophy, and was also very interesting, but is a bit of makes my brain hurt with too much material in that area. So Volume 3 has been a nice change of pace. I've really been enjoying it. I've discovered that I very much enjoy Milton's writing, his prose. I will be reading Paradise Lost. I'm currently kind of working ahead on that one, even though it appears later on in the Harvard Classics collection. And I'm glad I'm doing that because it is very difficult to read. It's definitely not an easy read. So I'm working on that, enjoying that, even though it's very difficult, and very much enjoyed Milton's prose, his Areopagitica and his Tractate on Education. It's a very different type of read, and I feel like it's a great starting point for anyone who's interested in reading some of Milton's works. And I think it's a very good door to walk through to kind of get an understanding of what Milton believed, what he wrote about, his style of writing, etc., before diving into something like Paradise Lost, which is quite the undertaking. So very nice, because these type of works I would not have gravitated towards instinctively. I would have started out with something like Paradise Lost, but because I'm reading the Harvard Classics collection, I'm getting these really important works that I never would have read otherwise kind of being directed towards me. And that's one of the great benefits of reading the Harvard Classics collection, I think. So the Areopagitica was a defense of the freedom of the press that Milton wrote when a lot of regulations and laws were popping up in England that really hindered freedom of the press. People were being punished for printing things without proper approval, and things that didn't meet the standards of the government and the religious orders that were in power at the time in England were being not being allowed to be printed. And printing presses were being destroyed, and businesses were getting out of business. And so a lot was going on that caused Milton to write that work, and it was a very great defense of freedom of the press, something that is very important even today. And I think that the same can be said of the Tractate on Education, is that while some of it is a little out of date, he talks a lot about like physical activity and the importance of learning how to like fence and wrestle and things like that, that is more relevant to the education of boys, at least in the realm of wrestling, and B is more a sign of something that was like popular and deemed important during that time. Whereas today, you probably would not find fencing as a physical education program in any kind of school or even in personal study, unless it's something you specifically really were interested in and wanted to seek out on your own. It's not something that's readily available or that's deemed necessary to raise up a educated young person. And so things like that are kind of a little out of date, and I think are not as applicable now as they would have been during Milton's time, whereas something like reading and things like that he talks about in the Tractate on Education are definitely more applicable. And some of his ideas are a little unrealistic in modern times, I think. A lot of it, I think, is kind of like there's not really as much of a use for it now with technology, certain things. But I think it's also very important to look at how proper education was seen of in the past, when we had all these brilliant, very influential people rising up, people like Milton, people like Benjamin Franklin, people like that were very impactful on our world as we know it today. And if we take a look at how they were educated and the things that their society deemed proper for an education, I think it's very helpful at re-examining what all society deems a proper education and how that may be in conflicting views. And I'll be upfront when I say that I was homeschooled. I went to a very small, affordable private school because my dad was a teacher there. And then I was homeschooled during high school. I did dual enrollment classes at my local community college. And so I graduated with an associate's degree when I was done with high school. Then I went on to college and got a degree that I'm not very happy with, that I have not had much use for. So I kind of followed this interesting path in my own education. First, not going to public school, and then secondly, graduating college 2 years early. And now I'm planning on going back to school for cosmetology, which is a sort of trade type thing, not like a traditional trade, but something that's more in the trade realm, where I won't be using my past communications degree as much as I might have, say, with a corporate job. But I've kind of had a strange tract of education myself. So this is a topic that is very interesting to me, especially as someone who was formerly homeschooled / Christian private school situation. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about that as I'm talking about Milton's essay. The Tractate on Education was written in 1673. It was originally a letter addressed to Mr. Samuel Hartlib, and Milton didn't really want to write it, but Hartlib was kind of pestering him, saying, you need to talk about this. Whereas he thought he had more important things to talk about, like his Areopagitica and other issues that he was very passionate about at the time. But Hartlib pressured him into writing this letter that talked about his views on education. So you see that Milton was his opinion was valued by Hartlib at least, and by others, I'm sure. And it's a very interesting opinion to look at now in modern times. But he wrote this letter to Hartlib, and it's very short. It's kind of a since you pestered me so much, here is what I think education should be, what I think it's lacking at the moment, and my thoughts on proper education. Milton's Tractate on Education begins with a definition of what he considers to be a complete and generous education. He then lays down a program that includes Latin, Greek, Chaldean, Syrian, and Hebrew, which is both excessive and unrealistic for a student to learn that many languages, and I sort of doubt that Milton himself knew all of those languages, at least fluently. And while a classical education would traditionally include Latin, Greek, and possibly like French, something along those lines, Milton takes it to the next level with certain languages that in the educational context would really only possibly be relevant studying the Bible, and even then that would be a stretch. Chaldean and Syrian I'm not even sure what the use of those two languages in a English education, classical education would be exactly, but Milton does include them in what he considers to be a complete and generous education. The system that Milton sets out also includes science, training in religion and words, exercise, poetry, and music in addition to those languages. So it's very thorough, it's very, it covers a wide range of topics, and what I would consider a classical education would cover a lot of those topics, and also his view that exercise and music and things like that are important to be considered in education, I think is a good view to take on it, is that education does not just include the things that you would learn in school, like science and math and English and things like that. It should also include things that better yourself, better your future self, which would include exercise and things like leisurely type things like music. And music also, there's studies that show that it helps with memory, it helps with cognitive function, things like that. So music can also be a very important thing that a lot of schools try to incorporate, but I feel like music is definitely something that's lacking in our society today, especially classical music. I've learned, personally, trying to learn the violin this last year and a half or so, that reading music is very good for my brain. I guess it's like learning a language, reading music and learning musical theory and things like that. And I'm just barely scratching the groundwork for that. But I've learned that as I'm doing this, I'm getting better at hearing music and almost seeing it. Like I can almost see what chord is being played, things like that. That I never had this ability before learning how to read sheet music. And I've learned by talking to other people that a lot of people who learn classical instruments like piano and violin don't ever really learn how to read sheet music. I had a friend say that she memorized chords and stuff and didn't like tell her teacher that she was doing that, but she would do that to avoid having to actually learn how to read the sheet music. And I think that's very interesting that is something that people do, and I think it's something that I probably would have been prone to do if I had started to learn the violin at a younger age. A lot of students who are forced into learning a musical instrument as part of their education come to dislike it and disdain it, and I think that's something that's very sad, because I know that I love playing the violin. It's something that I'm very passionate about, but I'm not sure if I would have felt that way if I had started learning it at a young age and been forced to practice and things like that. And I don't know if technically this is something that happened as much during Milton's time as it happens in present time, but I do think that part of the problem is that parents have these expectations of their children to learn the instruments when the parents themselves don't know how to play these instruments and don't practice instruments and things like that. And so the kid doesn't really have the example to look at where they're like, oh, my parent does this and they enjoy doing it. And it's kind of like if you want a kid to eat the broccoli at dinner, but you as an adult don't eat your vegetables, you're not really going to convince them that it's good for them and that they should do it if you don't demonstrate that behavior yourself. And so I think that's something that's important to take into consideration, especially in the realm of music, also in areas like science and math and things like that, English, all the different areas, but especially science and math. I've kind of seen in my own life, at least, is that if you're around people who are like, oh, I'm awful at math, I hate math is horrible, then you're probably going to pick up some of those behaviors and see it in your own view of that subject, is that you're going to be like, math isn't important, I don't like math, why should I do math, I can just use a calculator, things like that. And so a lot of learning is figured out by children learn by watching others do things, and so that's important to take into consideration. And I think that's something that Milton kind of falls short on in his view of education, is that he has this very excessive broad view of what a proper education should entail. I don't know that much about Milton, so I don't know exactly whether he abided by a lot of those things himself. But I do think that it can be an unrealistic view for children to adapt such a extensive program if they don't have somebody to model that program for them. An adult who has been through it themselves, who they can look to and say, yeah, that person lives a life that I want to aspire to live like. And so I will undertake this massive undertaking in order to achieve that. So Milton's Tractate on Education starts out with this like really generous system of education that is hard to uphold, and if you look at it from the outside, it seems completely unrealistic. But a few of the points that he makes are very important, and I think something that we should adopt in all idea of education. And I think that it's also not good to think that something like this is completely out of the range of possibility and that kids cannot do something like this, because I've realized that anytime you underestimate what children are capable of, and even what adults who are determined to do something are capable of, it's not a good idea. The amount of people who have told me that I can't learn a violin because I'm too old and it's something that you have to learn as a child and you're never going to excel at it or be good at it if you start at an older age. I can't even count how many people have told me that, and I'm just like, you know, I have Irish descent in me. Don't tell me what I can or can't do. But I have the determination that a lot of children lack when their parents say you're going to learn a musical instrument. I actually really want to learn this musical instrument. I have a passion for it, I have an interest in it, and it's something that I really want to excel at. And so I have more aptitude to practice than a child who's being forced to do so. And so that's something that I think it's important to think about when looking at a plan like this, is that there has to be some kind of interest or motivation for doing the thing. And if that is there, then it's not impossible to accomplish something like this. And so now that that's like off my chest, that essay of my own there, I'm going to read a few quotes from Milton's Tractate on Education. Milton wrote, "The end, then, of learning is to repair the ruins of our first parents by regaining to know God aright, and out of their knowledge to love him, to imitate him, to be like him, as we may the nearest, by possessing our souls of time, virtues, which being united to the heavenly grace of faith makes up the highest perfection." So Milton is kind of saying that one of the purposes of education is to repair the damages done by our forefathers, done by Adam and Eve all the way back, and that it's to grow closer to God and to be united to the heavenly grace of faith, and to seek out virtues which cause that uniting, and that it's to seek the highest level of perfection that we can achieve. And that's one of the purposes of education. And a classical Christian education would definitely include that in like theology and learning in that realm of things as well. And so Milton's idea of the theological realm of education is that we are to strive to heavenly levels. When Milton is talking, Milton has a bit of a obsession, especially with the area of language. And when he's talking about language, he writes, "So that language is but the instrument conveying to us things useful to be known." He sees language not so much as learning a language just for the sake of learning it, but learning a language so that you can read things written in that language that are useful and that you want to know. And this is particularly true of the Greek and Latin and Hebrew, but especially Greek and Latin in the realm of a classical education. Those languages would often have been learned so that people could study the Greek classics, the Latin classics, things like that that were deemed very important in their native tongue. And I have on my shelf behind me the Odyssey in Greek, and one of my motivations to learn in Greek is so that I can read the Odyssey in its native language. I love the Odyssey. I really enjoyed reading it in English, and I have the Emily Wilson translation, which I think is fantastic, and it's a very enjoyable read. I really enjoy it, but I really want to be able to read it in Greek, and although I don't need to read it in Greek because there's really good translations available, it's something that I really want to be able to do, to accomplish. And so that's one of my goals in learning Greek. I'd love to learn Latin someday. I mean, French would be cool. There's so many languages I want to learn, but I am starting late and it is difficult, and it's something that I have to work at steadily, surely but steadily, and hope to progress in quicker. I don't have the mental capability to pick it up as quickly as a child would be able to do, theoretically. And it's very much like trudging through the ditches to try to get to where I want to be. But chipping away at it, another thing that I want to be able to do is read the Bible in the traditional Greek, because something that's very prevalent in the Bible is that translators take liberties. And that's the same case in any book that's translated. And it's something that you kind of give up some of your ability to read the original and to understand it for yourself. You kind of surrender that when you read a translated version. You don't get the full picture. Something might be hidden in the deeper meaning of the original word that is lost in translation. And so that's one of the things that's really exciting and interesting about being able to read something in its native language. And that's something that Milton definitely gets at here, is that language is really just an instrument to be able to learn and to be able to have full understanding of what the source material says, and you're not reliant on a translator's view of it and their opinions and perceptions of the original text. I would love someday to be able to read Russian so that I could read Russian literature in its original text. But alas, that's something that I doubt I will ever get to in my lifetime. If I had another life, maybe, but it's something that I would only be learning to be able to read Russian literature, and I feel like there are better pursuits of my time at the moment, at least. And I do enjoy the translations of Russian literature, so it's a start. Milton also wrote, "If after some preparatory grounds of speech by their certain forms got into memory, they were led to the practical application thereof in some chosen short books, lessoned thoroughly to them, they might then forthwith proceed to learn the substance of good things and arts in due order, which would bring the language quickly into their power." And so what he's saying here is that if you learn the basic vocabulary and word structure and things like that early on in learning a language, and then quickly moved on to practical applications in reading or something similar to that, short stories, things like that, you would get a lot more out of a language and grasp it a lot quicker and understand it more fully and be fluent a lot quicker. And I think that's very true, because at least with music, which I consider musical theory, things like that, to be a sort of language. Sort of like sign language is a sort of language. You're not going to speak it, but you're going to be able to read it in a way. And so, musical theory, I could sit down and spend a year or two learning every in and out of musical theory on paper. But if I never practice it with playing my violin, I'm never going to really fully understand it and be able to see it, if that makes sense. I can see it on the paper, but I can't connect the dots fully if I don't hear what it's supposed to sound like. And then I'm in a way better able to see it in my mind as I'm playing music and be able to multitask and do all the things that you would have to do in a language where you are forced to multitask, forced to think about certain things simultaneously, hearing and saying and doing all at once in a way. And so by having that practical application, you actually understand it a lot quicker, and you understand it more fully than you ever would if you were just focused on vocabulary all the time. That's something that I really want to be able to get to the point of in Greek, so that I can actually read it. And I am being able to notice that I can understand certain words a little quicker, but a lot of the thing is vocabulary. And you're gonna pick up more advanced vocabulary as you're reading, but trying to read without any vocabulary is not going to be very effective. So there was definitely a balance in this, which I think it's important to remember, but you're going to be more motivated to accomplish something if you have the ability to use the practical application of it. Milton also wrote, about an hour and a half ere they eat at noon should be allowed them for exercise and due rest afterward, but the time for this may be enlarged at pleasure, according as their rising in the morning shall be early. And so this is in specific relating to exercise, and Milton is saying that, before they eat at noon, they should be allowed to exercise and then rest from that exercise. And I think this is important because your brain works better when you have a little bit of exercise, especially in children. They need to be able to run some energy off before school, before they sit down and do a lot of things and have to use their brain a lot. They need to use up some of that excess energy. And so that's something that's important about exercise, as well as mental and physical well-being for your current self and your future self. I've started recently, and this is kind of in line with the classical education philosophy, I think, is this idea of making time for physical exercise, and you're kind of striving to better all aspects of yourself when you're looking at a classical education. You're looking to deepen your knowledge, deepen your learning, spread out your abilities, be able to do multiple things like music and language and reading and science and math and things like that. But I think exercise also has its place there. And so recently I've started to try to exercise at least 3 times a week, like actively exercise. I go on walks and things like that on days that I don't go to the gym. But I am actively trying to work up a sweat, to raise my heart rate, to kind of make an active effort to get stronger, to have more lung capacity, things like that. And this is something that goes alongside the classical education in the fact that, for one thing, it clears my mind a lot. After I get off work, I go to the gym, and it really helps me to de-stress, to kind of let go of the negative thoughts, to get out of my own head in a way, I guess, and open up the space for more productive things. Sometimes I listen to an audiobook at the gym. Sometimes I have like a Kindle book on my phone that I read between sets of weights and things like that. And so I'm able to kind of get the mental education alongside the physical education. But also it's good sometimes to just not focus on that and to just kind of clear your head completely for a little while and focus on just moving your body and things like that, which I think is very, very important and something that I never really considered important until I started doing it. And now I actively feel worse when I don't do it, and I seek it out and I want to do it, and it's something that you have to build a habit to do. But also he's talking about it being done at a certain time, away from meals, things like that, I think is good for proper digestion, things like that. So Milton definitely sees the importance of this, sees the importance of rising early in the day to accomplish more, things along those lines. And that's the last quote that I have from the book. But I do want to talk about a few other little things that he talked about. Milton talked about fencing as a form of education or physical exercise. He mentioned the importance of it to train up men for war. And that's something that, like, fencing is not really as relevant to now as it would have been in Milton's time. You're not going to fight a war with a sword anymore, but I do think that it's an interesting thing that he connects the dot to, is that you are preparing a student for the best and the worst situation, I guess. and that you're preparing them for the academic realm of things and being able to create great accomplishments, furthering science, things like that. But you're also preparing them for the eventuality of something like war and making them strong both mentally and physically. And that's something that's important in our day and age as well. Although joining war is more of a voluntary type thing in our society today, there's always the possibility that it won't be. And regardless of that, there's always going to be trials, mental and physical, and there's going to be difficulties that any person needs to be able to overcome. And so building mental and physical resilience is very important, and I think a very important aspect of education, and something that is sort of lacking in our current educational realm of things. And it's something that can't really be completely taught in like an academic setting. It's something that you kind of have to learn through experience. And so that's something very important to look into, to consider alongside the other things that Milton lays out. And he talks about various things. He talks about like a boarding house type setting where the students are like completely focused on school. They're in a kind of isolated environment where they have that one focus and things like that I'm not sure would necessarily work in today's society. Probably would depends on like the type of person whether that would actually be effective or not. And as somebody who was homeschooled for a good portion of my life, I think that's very important that the parents are involved in their students' education. And something that I think is lacking in Milton's view of it is that the students in his ideal learning environment do not have their parents to support them through that program of study. And so that's something that also is reflected in our current day and age, more parental involvement, I guess, than would have been happening in Milton's time. But it's very interesting to look at the way that Milton's society and Milton viewed education versus our current view of education in America in modern times. So I thought Tractate on Education was really interesting. I think that it's motivating. All of these books that talk about the importance of education have been very motivating to me, especially books like Benjamin Franklin's autobiography that talked about self-education and the importance of like time management and things like that. It's a recurring topic throughout the Harvard Classics collection and something that makes me consider how I manage my own time and what I spend that time on, and try to better my own time management skills as I go along. And I think that Milton's Tractate on Education, if nothing else, it talks about the importance of time management and self-study and things like that as well. So, Tractate on Education, very good book. Essay letter. I really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed Milton's work. I'm looking forward to talking about Thomas Browne's Religio Medici. And then finally moving on to volume 4. I feel like I've been in volume 3 forever, and I haven't really spent any more time in volume 3 than I did in volume 2, but I definitely feel like I have. I feel like I've just gained so much more information now that I am kind of like my brain is so full just from volume 3. And it's amazing to me to look at my shelf of the Harvard Classics collection and see 51 volumes. That's insane. There's so much information within that, and I'm only on volume 3, and I already feel like I've learned more than I ever thought I would from this series of books. And so I'm really excited to see what else lies in store. And if you've read Milton's Tractate on Education, leave a comment below what you thought of it, what you think might be missing from it. What's your view on classical education? What is required in what you would consider necessary for classical education? I think that the views of it are kind of vague in a way, and that a lot of it is stuff that maybe would be changing a little bit in our current day and age. And so let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you like videos like this, subscribe, like this video. Stay tuned for the rest of the Harvard Classics collection. I have a long ways to go, slowly making progress. These videos really motivate me to keep moving forward ever so slowly. And so stay tuned for that. And thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.